The Allied invasion on June 6, 1944, was one of the largest and most significant military campaigns in history. The D-Day military invasion that helped end World War II was one of the most ambitious and consistent military campaigns in human history. In its strategy and scope, and the huge stakes on the future of the free world, historians consider it one of the greatest military achievements of all time. D-Day, codenamed Operation Overlord, began on June 6, 1944, after Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower ordered the largest invasion force in history, hundreds of thousands of American, British, Canadian, and other troops, to ship across La Manche and disembark on the beaches of Normandy, on the north coast of France. After almost 5 years of war, almost all of Western Europe was occupied by German troops or held by fascist governments such as those of Spain and Italy. The goal of the Western Allies, to end the German army and accordingly to overthrow the barbaric Nazi regime of Adolf Hitler. This is why D-Day remains an event of great importance and why we owe so much to these fighters. Stop the Nazi genocide machine. The German armies during World War II took over much of Europe and North Africa, as well as much of the Western Soviet Union. They set up bloody police states wherever they went, then hunted down and imprisoned millions. With the help of gas chambers and executions, they killed 6 million Jews and millions more Poles, Russians, gays, disabled people, and others objectionable to the Nazi regime, which sought to create a dominant German race. It is hard to imagine what the consequences would have been if the Allies had lost. One could argue that they saved the world. The invasion has gone beyond the beaches. The D in D-Day simply means day, the day we invaded. The military had to call it something. But for those who lived through June 6 and the subsequent summer invasion, D-Day meant sheer terror. Raymond Hoffman of Lowell, Massachusetts gave an oral history interview in 1978 at the Eisenhower Library about the fear of life and death he experienced as a 22-year-old paratrooper in the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. On D-Day, he parachuted into a cow pasture in Normandy just a few minutes after midnight with a thud, and heard fast approaching footsteps before he could unhook his parachute straps. In a skirmish with German soldiers, where the bullets flew so thickly that no one dared raise their heads to look up, he eliminated the riddle he had pondered for months about whether his fear in battle would make him run or fight. He fought, and there was no more mystery. "Now you know what it's like to be shot at," he said, "just like shooting." An effort of staggering proportions. "I had some fun here one day, looking up statistics on everything the Allies had amassed on the beaches of southern England to support the invasion," says Reeves. "They had huge ammunition depots and supply depots, and in one of these depots they stockpiled 3,500 tons of bath soap, which Eisenhower later shipped to France so the soldiers could take a bath. He had 3 million soldiers under his command, and eating them all in just one day was colossal," says Reeves. According to historian Rick Atkinson, commanders calculated the daily combat cost, from fuel to bullets to chewing gum, at 41,298 pounds per soldier. 60 million K rations, enough to feed the invaders for a month, were packed into 500-ton bales. Steep losses. German machine gunners mowed down hundreds of Allied soldiers before they left the landing boats on the beaches of Normandy. But Eisenhower crushed them, says Reeves, with 160,000 assault troops, 12,000 aircraft, and 200,000 sailors on 7,000 ships. Their losses were enormous. According to Atkinson, the 8 assault divisions on the coast lost 12,000 men killed, wounded, and missing, with thousands more missing. The Americans lost 8,230 men. Many were killed by 9.6-gram bullets traveling at 2,000 to 4,000 feet per second. Atkinson wrote, "Shards of steel like this can destroy the world cell by cell." 3,000 French civilians were killed during the invasion, mostly from Allied bombs or artillery fire. By then, the French had lost so much in the war that they had run out of medical supplies. Some injured citizens had to disinfect their wounds with calvados, a local brandy fermented from apples, Atkinson said. But when the Allied soldiers moved inland from the beaches, the French greeted them. Many of them gave flowers to the soldiers. Many sobbed with happiness. D-Day strategy. Nobody thought victory was guaranteed. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill molested Eisenhower and President Franklin Roosevelt 2 years before D-Day, imploring them to avoid Normandy and instead pursue a slower, less dangerous strategy of sending more troops into Italy and southern France. But the Germans had killed tens of millions of civilians and soldiers in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets desperately wanted the Allies to bleed the German army dry by opening a second front of battle. Eisenhower considered it shameful to avoid Normandy and considered Normandy the best military move not only to win, but to shorten the war. The Allies had long planned an invasion within the narrow window of the lunar cycle that would provide both maximum moonlight to illuminate the glider landing sites and low tides at dawn to reveal the Germans' extensive submarine coastal defenses. Bad weather forced the Allied troops to postpone the operation for a day by cutting through this window. But by a stroke of luck, German weather forecasters predicted that gale-force winds and rough seas would hold off the invasion even longer, so the Nazis redeployed some of their forces further away from the coast. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel even came home to celebrate his wife's birthday by bringing her a pair of Parisian shoes. The night before the invasion, Eisenhower wrote himself a "in case of failure" note in pencil, which could be published if necessary. "If any fault or error is associated with the attempt, then it is only my fault," he wrote. Of all the documents we have from his time in the military and his 8 years as president, I consider this our most important document here, Reeves said of the collection at the Eisenhower Library. It shows the character of the man who led it all. Eisenhower hated war. Years after the end of the war, he delivered a speech with a paragraph engraved on the marble stone wall surrounding his grave in Abilene, Kansas. Each gun produced, every warship launched, every missile fired means, in the end, theft from those who are hungry and not fed, who are cold and not clothed. This world in arms does not spend money alone. He wastes the sweat of his workers, the genius of his scientists, the hopes of his children. It's not a lifestyle at all in the truest sense of the word. The importance of winning on D-Day. Most battles are quickly forgotten, but all free nations owe their culture and democracy to D-Day, one of the greatest victories in history. Among them is George Washington's defeat of the British Army at Yorktown in 1781, which allowed the American experiment in democracy to survive and inspire oppressed people around the world. And in 490 and 480 BC, the small armies and navies of Greece defeated the huge forces of the invaders of the Persian Empire at the battles of Marathon and Salamis. The Greeks saved not only themselves, but also their democracy, classical literature, art and architecture, philosophy, and much more. Historians place D-Day in the same category of greatness.